Good morning and welcome back to Battlesnake Official. We are super excited to have Dr. Andrew Maxwell joining us today and doing an introduction on design thinking and everything you need to know to get started with that. So we're super excited. Dr. Andrew Maxwell comes from the Lassonde School of Engineering at York University, and he holds the Bergeron chair there of in the technology entrepreneurship. Ooh, I haven't had enough coffee yet this morning. All right. On that note, I'm going to pass over to Dr. Andrew for the design thinking workshop. I am personally very excited about this and excited to learn more about this topic. So thanks, Andrew.
So first of all, I'm really delighted to be here, and I'm very excited about the whole event that you're doing. I think you will know that when you said, would you like to be involved? It was, yes, we'll do whatever you need, and it's great to be just part of this. So I'm going to talk about today is a really important issue, concept, which is design thinking. And some of your viewers may be very familiar with it. Some may be using it, especially if they're doing UX design, because many of the concepts come from that. But it does come from the basic idea of engineering. And it's really looking at how you do things in a different way. And so what I'm going to do, we run whole 1-week courses on this. We run seminars. We run, it's part of our classes at York. What I really wanted to do was to give people a taste of why it's different and why it's valuable and how it might be useful for people involved in software development or any other problem-solving activity. Because fundamentally, it allows you to look at problems from a different perspective and therefore to come up with solutions that might be disruptive rather than just incremental. That might be a different way of doing things or might meet a different need. So that's a kind of the motivation behind it. And I'm going to share the lesson. Hopefully it will be useful. It might be directly useful in terms of what people are doing in their coding. It might be useful in what they're doing in their lives. But if they're ever in a business or an opportunity where they want to look at problem solving, I assure you that after they've heard and been introduced to design thinking, they will start to use a design thinking lens because it's such a great way to look at problems and look at doing things differently. So let me talk about design thinking and innovation to start with. So design thinking allows you to do new things, and innovation is about doing new things. That involves risk. So it's not so much looking at incremental, how do I make this slightly better, or how do I change this, or how do I have a slight modification to this interface? It's really around enhancing innovation. And innovation is important for a number of reasons. It offers solutions that are quantifiably better than alternates. It improves user experiences, not just by a slight amount, but by quite a lot. It offers a better way of doing things, which means that people get more satisfied, and it helps you attract partners. If you're in the software industry, you'll know that why would people want to work with you than somebody else? Well, they want to see that you're doing something different. And it's not just different for difference sake. It's different because it actually creates a competitive advantage. And so innovation is really critical, and design thinking is a tool to help you innovate, especially for those people that maybe are saying, how can I do something different? And if you're in a business world, of course, competitive advantage, innovation are all linked to financial performance. So there is a big win at the end for those things. But you can do things that are just linked to having better, more interactions with your community, greater satisfaction from people using your software, etc. But the challenge is that innovation is difficult because we don't actually understand what to do. We all find change difficult. We all find it difficult to do things that we weren't expected to do, or even to create environments. It's easy to create an environment that's rigid and says, well, you have to do this, and before you do that, you have to do this. But it's difficult to do things where you actually don't know what the rules are. And what we can do, though, is we can make that easier by helping you learn some tools that help you increase the likelihood of innovating. And more importantly, it is a process. So we can actually help you understand the process, and following a process will lead to improved outcomes. Sometimes actually people do ask me, surely process and innovation are there's a disconnect. But the reality is that there are lots of reasons why innovation fails. And the most important one is actually people come up with a new idea and then they don't have a way to do anything about it. So a process helps you manage that disconnect. It also helps you eliminate bad ideas quickly and actually implement good ideas. So having a process actually enhances innovation, which is using new ideas and developing them, not just coming up with them. And we can all learn strategies to help with doing successful innovation. So innovation, design thinking, they're all linked together. and they're all new ways of doing things. So let me start at the beginning by introducing the very concept of design thinking. So design thinking is different because it's a tool set, it's a different way of looking at problems, and it will help you do your current job better. And if you're actually in software development, you can actually apply it at every stage of software development. But anywhere where you're just trying to solve a problem, it really helps you look at things by enhancing the user experience, by better understanding user needs, by creating a structured collaborative approach to share ideas. So rather than just having one person work on enhancing something, it actually creates a structure so that you can come together with friends, colleagues, teammates to come up with ideas. And it helps you introduce new alternative approaches and choose between solutions. And design thinking constantly outperforms traditional approaches to create solutions that are measurably better than alternates, because it starts by understanding user needs. It's essentially a human-centered approach that draws from a designer's toolkit to integrate the needs of people, possibilities, and technology, and the requirements for business success. It's obviously a quote from Tim Brown, who's the present CEO of IDEO, and one of the real creators, with colleagues at Stanford University and Roger Martin at Rotman, of the whole idea of design thinking.
When companies set strategy, they often stumble. Either they collect a lot of backward-looking data, which doesn't tell them what future customers really want, or they make risky bets based on instinct instead of evidence. Design thinking is a strategy-making process that avoids these mistakes by applying tools from the world of design and shifting the focus to human behavior. Popularized by David M. Kelly and Tim Brown of IDEO and Roger Martin of the Rotman School, design thinking has 3 major stages. First, invent a future. Form a few theories about what customers might want but don't have by immersing yourself in their lives. Instead of polling them about specific products or services, observe and ask questions about their behavior. Next, test your ideas out. Use iterative prototyping with good enough products or services and conduct a few quick experiments to see how consumers respond. Adjust the product, the pricing, or the positioning accordingly. Finally, bring the new product or service to life. When you've got a winner, identify the activities, capabilities, and resources your company will need to actually produce, distribute, and sell it. For example.
So the important thing about design thinking is it's a stage process that helps you come up with new ideas and then test them. And this whole idea, people have heard of things like lean startup. This whole idea of testing at each stage is very familiar to people doing UX. But actually, you might want to actually think about how you can use it earlier on. For example, if even the idea that you're working on good, or even if you could do something, can you test it as a concept before you can test it as a piece of software? So the stages of design thinking are 5, and these are kind of well documented. Let me just explain them briefly. The first one starts by understanding the user needs, by observing what people are doing, by empathizing with them, putting yourselves in their footsteps. The second is, based on those observations, to create a view of what it is that they actually need. And one of the things we're going to talk a little bit about is their functional needs and their emotional needs. Once you have that, it becomes easier to come up with ideas and solutions that will actually address those needs. And then you want to test them. You want to test them. In many cases, we talk about prototyping, because actually what we want to do is share that idea with other people and see if they like it. Importantly, in the concept of design thinking, people have heard of a concept of a minimum viable product. But by the time you've built a minimum viable product, you've already invested time and money in developing a solution. We talk about developing a minimum viable idea, a minimum viable value proposition, a minimum viable solution before you actually develop a minimum viable product. Each stage allows you to refine and to maybe even rethink what you were doing and then quickly pivot to a new solution. The secret of success is keeping pivoting based on user feedback to get closer and closer to the goal. People familiar with programming will understand that concept, but that's now the concept of design. And it's very different from spending lots of time doing research, coming up with a big plan and then implementing the plan, and then recognizing after a year of spent money and working on the plan that what you came up with, no one actually really wanted in the first place. That's why design thinking is such a valuable tool to help you move forward with your idea. Let me quickly go through each of those stages. Empathizing is really the idea of getting into the hearts and minds of the users, engaging with them, observing them, putting yourself in their place. Excuse me. It's important to recognize this is not what would traditionally be called market research. Do not ask people what they want because they don't know. You need to ask them what motivates them, what frustrations they've had in the past, and how they feel when they're having a current experience. Doing this helps you develop insights and beliefs about what needs they have that are unmet. And that's really critical because then you can develop solutions to meet the unmet needs, not just improvements on how current needs are met. The second stage is to take all the data that you get from looking at these observations and sense make, which is use all insights into their functional and emotional needs and observations. And even there's a technique called fault analysis, which again, some of you programming might be familiar with, which is data analysis based on what's been failing in the past, and use all of these to come up with a better definition of what the problem is that you're trying to define, and then using your insights to come up with good solutions. And then you need to reframe that opportunity into a challenge statement. How might we? How might we change the way we distribute food in a post-COVID environment? How might we change education to make it more engaging online? All of these statements don't introduce a solution into the discussion. They are a world of possibilities, and that's what you're trying to do. Gives it a guide to coming up with ideas and solutions. The next stage of that is then to come up with ideas, and often they're brainstorming, but by using the framing that we've talked about, it allows you to think out of the box, harness the creative powers of your diverse team, and I think people already know the importance of diverse teams, different perspectives, and explore and discover new opportunities. So you diverge first to create a number of ideas and then converge on the ones that are interesting. We'll talk a little bit about that diverging and converging in 1 second. When you converge, you then are choosing the ones that are most powerful. This is actually a really important point because in our normal way of doing things, we tend to leap to the solution. We tend to find out a solution and then spend our time justifying. And in the design thinking process, we actually want to diverge on a number of different possible solutions. Then we want to synthesize them together to make them better and then converge on the right one. So in design thinking, there are a bunch of rules about how we do this. One could call it brainstorming. It's a typical technique, but we basically don't spend too much time judging as people come up with ideas, don't killing ideas too quickly, but in fact, collect a whole bunch of them. Often you see people do them on Post-it notes, for example. That's why design thinking is, and 3M have a big affinity for each other. And then synthesize those to come up with some common themes and then choose between them because you're probably going to choose one or two. And the cool thing is because it's an experimental process where you're developing prototyping and testing, the ways to choosing is often, well, we'll experiment. We'll offer 3 different ways of doing this and see which one gets the best response. Again, many of those involved in UX design are going to be very familiar with that approach, but this is actually applying it to the whole design process. And here's different ways for looking at your idea, how you might improve it. So that box in the middle is a way of taking ideas and prioritizing them. The one thing I would say is I've never seen a good idea at first. What happens is people come up with half an idea, but then by iterating it and in that box in the middle, processing it, synthesizing it, and importantly, sharing with other people, you can actually come up with much better ideas. So prototyping is just a way to actually get feedback on your idea. It's really important that we use that word rather than selling. So our normal approach is we come up with an idea and we spend time selling it to other people. Prototyping is different. Prototyping, we're actually testing. We're letting people experience the idea and then giving feedback on it. The idea is then to test it, to come up with results, and to tell you to do one of 3 things. Continue, great. Pivot, change what you were doing, or stop because it's not really a good idea. And it's really important that you become very good at listening to the feedback when you do your tests, because it often it'll be negative, and it's really important that you don't ignore that negative. One of my friends, Goal Shaw, who's a co-founder of a company called Algory, which is a company that listens to machines and interprets when they need fixing, said about prototypes, if it doesn't have wires sticking out on rubber bands or duct tape, you've gone too far. So the idea is, if you kind of have that mentality, and especially as an engineer, that resonates with me, then what can you do to test it? It's important to understand that the whole idea of these prototypes is to get rapid results inexpensively, but that have value. And that's kind of a different thing than we would normally talk about. So prototyping should test a hypothesis. It should test the hypothesis so that it's quick and expensive, and you do it at each stage, from idea to value proposition. And you need to do it in a way that you let the user experience what you're saying rather than you try to sell them. So that's where we use storyboards, it's where we use Lego, it's where we use drawings, it's where we use all sorts of tools to show people what we're doing rather than to actually build something that's working. I should mention, you may wonder what this Lego prototype on the right, I think it's actually Duplo, but maybe. This is actually a prototype of something that's very interesting, particularly for those of us who have a background in software. This is actually the very first Google server. At the time, they didn't have the ability to rack mount things, so they built a rack out of Duplo, and they mounted the servers and the fans all together in one box. It's now in the Stanford Museum, but even they were building prototypes out of Lego, because as you can imagine, building out of Lego was much faster and cheaper than any alternative. So the solution's designed to test an idea, not to create a scaled down version of a solution. And that's really important to understand that. And then finally, the testing, you need to be very open to iterating. You need to use it to learn more. And even you can use it to get feedback from people to say, hey, what is it that we're doing, or how could we improve it? So how do we use design thinking in software development? So there are basically a number of stages. I'm kind of maybe talking to the converted, and I apologize for that. But the basic stages of software development are plan and analyze, design, develop, test, and maintain. And you can actually use design thinking at each stage of these, thinking about user-centric design. What is it that you're trying to achieve with the user, and how do you give them an experience that is unique? And again, I want to emphasize the idea that we're always developing user experiences, not user functionality. And that's kind of a really interesting insight into what really goes on. In fact, one of my colleagues was telling me the other day that in the COVID situation, he was online playing old Nintendo games that he played as a kid with his kids. And the shared experience was fabulous, even though the graphics sucked. And so it's kind of interesting to see that if you get to the heart of things and understand the experience, some of the ways we currently look at good performance may change. So the traditional approach that we use is solution-centered, and you think and you plan and you try to avoid failure and you do lots of analysis. And in contrast, design thinking is human-centered. It's based on informed trial and error. It's failing fast, deep customer observations, and continuously improvement. Everything's in beta. Everything's going on a journey to a solution. And it's quite a different approach than we're normally used to. So traditional design was object-centered. What can we make? Modern design is user-centered. How can we enhance the user experience? And I think it's really interesting to look at those things and see what they mean. Now, the interesting thing is that as we start to understand people's emotional needs, they fundamentally change the nature of what we deliver. So let me give you a couple of examples. So if it's an experience, two examples. The first one, Fabry's. What people may not know is that Fabry's was virtually killed, or almost killed, at a very early stage. Not because it didn't work in terms of eliminating odors. It has a really great chemical that actually absorbs odors, as we've seen on the ads, and gets rid of them. And so that is very powerful. The problem is when people were using it, after you had used it, you could not tell that it had been used because all it done was removed odors. No one could detect the absence of odors. So they had to add to it a small chemical, in this case, blossom and breeze, whatever that chemical is, to give the scent in the room after the room had been cleaned. So the smell from the Fabry's is purely put in to make you think that you've done the getting rid of odors job. It's actually not the thing that gets rid of the odors the underlying chemical does. And while that might seem a little complex, another example is this. So the original Betty Crocker party mix, I'm going to play the video because it's interesting. The original Betty Crocker party cake mix was a failure because all you had to do was add water. Yet someone said, why is it a failure? And they talked to a bunch of housewives, and I know that sounds sexist, but that was the market at the time, about why people weren't using it. And the idea was because it wasn't really baking a cake if all you did was add water. And so they said, well, we could take the egg powder out and ask people to add eggs, and then it would feel like baking a cake. And they tested that, and guess what? Sales went through the roof, and the rest is history.
When you make a cake from a mix, which do you want? A fresh egg cake or a cake made with dried eggs? For higher, lighter, tastier cake, why, fresh eggs, of course. But remember, all cake mixes are not alike. Betty Crocker cake mixes are different. They call for your eggs, added by you at home. It's the only national cake mix brand that lets you add the eggs. There's a reason why there are no dried egg whites, no dried egg yolks in Betty Crocker cake mixes. When you add the eggs, you're sure to get finer cakes most consistently. 9 out of 10 homemakers in recent tests said Betty Crocker cake mixes gave them bigger, taller cakes than the dried egg cake mixes they tested. Yes, and better tasting cakes, too. Try Betty Crocker Party Cake Mix for yellow, white, or spice cakes. And try Betty Crocker Chocolate Devil's Food Cake Mix for rich, moist devil's food with genuine fresh egg goodness. Get Betty Crocker cake mixes today.
So interesting that by changing the job, actually making it harder, you gave people more satisfaction. And in reality, it's actually very difficult to tell the difference between the tastes. But people were more satisfied by the fact that they could add eggs. And understanding what job you're doing is actually at the heart of design thinking. It's why Tim Brown talks about it as user-centered design. What is the emotional? What are the functional needs and the emotional needs? So how do we dissect that? How do we try to work out what it is we're trying to do, whether you're coding for the competition or whether you're coding in real life, or just looking at challenges facing your business? How do you actually define what the needs are that people have? So I'm going to give a brief introduction to a concept called jobs to be done, which was basically developed by Clay Christensen, and talks about how you actually understand how to find jobs that need to be done.
There's a concept from our research that really has proven to be powerful, and that is that the customer is the wrong unit of analysis when you're trying to innovate. And that goes against the gospel that's taught in most business schools and marketing programs. But rather than the customer, you need to understand what it is the customer is trying to accomplish. What's the job that the customer is trying to get done? And a job is a very stable thing. It exists whether or not there's a market for products that could be hired to do the job. And if you just are cognizant of watching what people do and asking yourself, I wonder why she's trying to do that. You know, what's she trying to accomplish through this, whatever it is she's doing? You know, for example, there's been a job forever, which is I've got to get this from here to there with perfect certainty as fast as possible. And that need has always existed out there, disembodied. You think of, you know, the game board, the game of life. It's got all these serpentine paths across the game of life, and you land on a space and you find yourself needing to get something done. Well, that's actually not a bad representation of the way the world works. You know, I as a consumer one day may not need to get this from here to there with perfect certainty as fast as possible, but on occasion I land on that space, and I do. And so then I ask myself, gosh, what can I hire to get this job done? And I look around, and Gosh, back in Julius Caesar's day, the only thing you could hire was a horseman with a chariot, and you'd give it to him and send him off over the hill and hope he got there safely. And then airmail coalesced, and you could hire airmail to get this from here to there with perfect certainty as fast as possible, and it wasn't very certain or fast. And then FedEx came in with a system that really does the job just about as fast and as certainly as anyone can possibly do it. And so the job has always been there. It's stable. You can, if you're looking for it, you can see that the job is there. And then as products and services are developed to do the job, a market emerges. But that's the kind of mindset you have to have. In the automobile industry, everybody makes cars, and everybody's trying to copy the best features of everybody else's cars. And as a consequence, they're very difficult to differentiate. But if you watch what people are trying to accomplish when they drive a car, there are about 6 jobs for which a car is hired. And one of those jobs is, I'm a salesperson, I'm a service person, and I got to work out of my car. My car is my office. And you look around, there are no cars that are designed to be an office, even though there are between 5 and 8 million people a year who have to work out of their car. So they'll go to the dealer and buy a one-size-fits-none automobile, chisel them down on the price as far as they can go, and then as soon as they drive off the lot, they begin spending thousands of dollars every year trying to transform the car into an office. So to get access to the internet, they got to pull over to Starbucks to use the T-Mobile hotspot. They got their BlackBerry and they're just pecking out answers to their emails. At 11 o'clock, they'll just go to the back tables at McDonald's and spread all their paper out to fill out their expense reports and the customer progress reports. They stop at a traffic light and the notebook computer falls onto the floor because there's no docking station there. They're driving with one hand, talking on the phone with another. They're spending a lot of time and effort trying to transform the car into an office because no car company designed a car to do the job well. But if the car companies would, and this job exists, there's no market yet because nobody's developed a product for that job. But just watching what people are doing, you can imagine what extraordinary opportunities a car company would have to design the cockpit of a car to work perfectly as a mobile office.
So I think that there's a really interesting concept that Clay talks about, and obviously he talked about lots of interesting concepts. And the concept was, don't assume that markets exist, but try to understand jobs, because jobs are more permanent. And if you can do a job better than somebody else, often in a radically different way, then that gives you an opportunity for innovation. So let me just give you one example. And this one is one that has been used in the business world for a long time. Well, it was talked about originally from a marketing point of view. And that is, why do people buy drills? Now, TedLevitt, who was quite a well-known professor of marketing, said, you have to be very conscious that people don't want to buy a drill. They don't care about the tungsten carbide or the size. They actually just want to put a hole in the wall. And therefore, what you should be thinking about is, what is it that they're doing, and rather than just the need to buy a drill. Because the alternative to a drill might be a hammer. You could use a hammer to put a hole in the wall. And so he basically said, when someone goes into a store, they might be looking for a drill, but their competition may not be another drill. It may be a hammer. And this is really interesting because the competition is by something that does the same job. The cool thing is, if you extend that, you actually think even further. So let's take the example of why you're putting the hole in the wall. And let's imagine that the reason you're putting the hole in the wall is to hang up a picture. So people actually don't want holes in the wall. They just want to hang a picture. And so 3M looked at this and they said, hey, if people just want to hang a picture, then we could make an adhesive hook to go on a wall that would do that job better than the drill or the hammer. And that is a really interesting insight. And it's an example that I've used for some time. I teach a class at the University of Minnesota, which people may know is the home of 3M. And when I actually presented this in the class, one of the people came up and said, "But you know, Andrew, you've talked about meeting functional needs and emotional needs. And you've just talked about the functional need associated with hanging the picture. In practice, what we found when we developed this product was that they had an emotional need as well." So I asked him to tell me about it.
Hi, my name is Paul Hansen. I'm a retiree from 3M and had the opportunity to work on many new products, one of which was Command. We were just talking about Command as an opportunity to replace holes or nails, and I wanted to give you just a little bit of background in terms of how we thought about that process. We did some ethnographic research where we went into the homes and apartments of individuals and tried to, at first just from an observation standpoint, understand how they were hanging pictures in their home. And what we saw is many cases the pictures were actually on the floor and not on the wall, or we'd see a wall that had blue tape, which we sell as well, where the pictures were scaled out on the wall, where they could go in the future, but weren't on. And when we started to dialogue with the individuals about why the products weren't on the wall, what really came out is a lack of confidence or a concern that they might make a mistake and put a picture in the wrong place. And so it wasn't even so much about putting a hole in the wall. It was, what if I don't like that particular location and I have to move it? Now I have a problem, or I'm going to be embarrassed with it. And so what we were able to understand from an emotional standpoint is to be able to give them the confidence to be able to put a picture up, but then if it wasn't in the right place, to be able to move it without any damage to the wall. That's what really was a winner for the product.
Thank you. So it's interesting to see that people understand the need for functional needs and emotional need. Before leaving jobs to be done, I wanted to add another interesting perspective on using it, because it's a very helpful tool when you're developing any type of product or service. This comes from Tony Olwick, who's one of the other people that created the idea of jobs to be done. And he said, sometimes when we think about a technology or a solution, we think about it in terms of a product, not in terms of the job it is doing. And he gives the example of listening to music. And specifically, he said that, people said that the market is moving from LPs to CDs. They didn't really understand why CDs do a better job than LPs, but they just saw one taking over from the other. But they didn't understand the nature of how that improved it until people started talking about how you store it and how you can play tracks in a different order. But then as you start to extend that, it becomes clear that if people want to listen to music, there are other and perhaps even better ways of doing that. For example, creating an MP3 product, where the real innovation that Apple had when they developed the iPod was the ease with which people could retrieve music. It wasn't that you could store music on an MP3 player. There were a bunch of Zune and a bunch of other MP3 players. It was the interface that made it easy to retrieve it. So actually the thing that transformed music to be downloadable music was the Apple interface that allowed you to choose it. And now more recently, of course, we have streaming markets. And streaming markets do the job even better because they're interactive. So I'm going to give you a very specific tool. You can find out more about it on Tony Olwick's website around how you break down jobs. So what he basically says is that every job that you ever need to do has 8 stages. It's defining what is the job, you locate what it is you need, things to do it, you prepare, you make the decision to go ahead, you execute the job, you check it's being done, maybe you modify it, and then you conclude it. And he has a great article in Harvard Business Review called The Customer-Centered Innovation Map. And you can apply this to whether you're making toast in the morning, or whether you're signing up for college, or whether you're developing a new software. You can put all of those 8 stages together. And so it's a really interesting tool to use, and he uses it a lot of different contexts. But I'm going to take it back and look at that job of listening to music. And let's talk about that. So listening to music that's the kind of 5th stage. But what are the stages in listening to music? You want to assess the situation. You want to get the music you want to listen to. You want to organize it. You want to confirm which bits of music you want to play. Then you listen to it. You monitor their experience. Maybe you modify it for the future, and then you assess it. Those are the 8 stages listening to music. And how does that change? And how does this job mapping predict the changes in technology that have created the evolution of how we listen to music? So MP3 players allowed us to do 3 more of the jobs, not just listening to music, which is the 5th one, but it allowed us to gather the music, it allowed us to organize the music, and then to modify the music selection. And MP3 players did the job fundamentally better than CDs. You can't compete. It's not the same. And people that were selling CDs were completely taken by surprise when MP3 players started to take over. And that's why they weren't able to react. And it's these types of innovations and design thinking that allow you to really disrupt the market. And if you go to the next step, which is streaming, then you'll see that on streaming, you can do more of the job. You can gather the design music, you can organize it, you can confirm it, you can monitor the experience, you can modify it, and you can assess the experience and build in feedback. So streaming music does more of a job. And streaming music, therefore, will always be superior to LPs, CDs, and MP3 players. And so by understanding all of the elements of the job that you're doing, you can actually come up with unique competitive advantages. And although these examples may not be directly relevant to what you're working on at the moment, using these tools can help you whenever you're trying to look at something new. And asking that question, could we do more of the job for the user? For those of us sitting at home now and doing a lot of online shopping, you might want to think about how the online experience of shopping is in some ways much better because the retailer is doing more of a job. They're sorting they're doing the transactions, they're recommending things, and then they're delivering it to your house. So it's a lot less trouble. Now, it doesn't take away from the fact that sometimes we actually like going out and having that retail experience. But for me, retail experience in a supermarket is not that important. Of course, for those of us in the education world, thinking about how we might use this approach to look at how we enhance student education is really an interesting and challenging discussion. So job mapping is a really interesting approach. A couple of things before I finish. First of all, I want to introduce some concepts that design thinking is a tool set, it's a process that changes the behaviors of how people work together. And the 7 elements that we talk about in design thinking that are really behind the whole process are that we actually focus on human values and understanding people. We show people things, we don't tell them or sell them. We embrace experimentation and try piloting and getting feedback. We watch the process. We don't jump to solutions too fast. We respect everyone's opinion. We look to build clarity. We radically collaborate. The process is designed to foster collaboration between teams, multidisciplinary teams in different locations, teams even distributed over time. And at the end of the day, it's not plan. So it's not plan and then act and then do. It's do and then act and then plan. And so this bias towards action, which people familiar with lean startup will see it echoes some of those things, trying out things, getting them to work and see what happens. So mindset is really important. One last slide I want to just talk about, which is the thing that's actually at the core of design thinking, which is design thinking when you're coming up with a new solution is always looking for the intersection of 3 things. It's always looking for evidence that what you want to do is desirable. People actually want it. You want to look for evidence it's feasible, you can actually do it and consistently perform to deliver the experience you want of this, and that it's viable, that at the end of the day, if you want it in simple terms, that you can make money, or that the cost of providing that solution can be covered by the revenue you can earn, even if the revenue does not always from the same place that is incurring the cost. And so this is the IDEO model of how to actually use design thinking to come up with solutions. So I want to end by telling you that design thinking for software development, it's a collaborative and structured approach which will help you develop new ideas. It fosters both incremental and radical innovation, and it focuses on the user experience and enhancing the user experiences by addressing functional and emotional needs. It's designed to hypothesis test and fail fast, and to facilitate the development of solutions that offer users a better experience than alternates, and in many cases creating a competitive advantage. So thank you. So now, other questions? Should I stop sharing my screen?
We don't have any questions so far. I just posted in Twitch to see if anybody has any questions before we sort of sign off. But at this point, we don't have any questions.
Okay, well,
let's kind of give it one more minute. I just want to say thanks to Andrew for that great presentation. I know design thinking is a lot of people are talking about it, and it's kind of become one of those newer buzzwords in tech. And so it's nice to see a workshop and a presentation that kind of breaks it down into what it actually is and how you use it, and the value it adds to technical teams and to really anyone who wants to like approach a problem with a new, more forward way of thinking.
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, one of the dangers is once you started using it, you'll use it for many things, and it's not always appropriate. But that's always the case. I think it's a really good structured way to go through something that is, in fact, innovation, and we don't have many tools for structured approaches to that. So it's actually a great way to test ideas out and to validate. And people say, well, have you tested this, and how do you know this? And also, we're increasingly seeing the need. The real advances come from multidisciplinary insights, where you have, there's a great video online if you want to watch it called the IDEO shopping cart experiment. And you find that people in there people that work in retail, that people that are ethnographers, that are people that are economists, engineers, etc. And you put them all in, because at the end of the day, all of these people doing different perspectives, and the richer the perspectives, the more likely you are to come up with an outcome. And the methodologies in design thinking actually help you to integrate those different things together. And different people play different roles at different stages, but at the end of the day, there's no question that outcomes are better.
Yeah, I mean, it's always about it's a nice tool and a nice framework to get that diversity of thought and those diverse perspectives into the planning stage, and allowing some structure around it instead of just throwing a bunch of people into the room and telling them to go for it.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, we haven't had any questions, so I guess we'll sort of sign off there. So again, I want to say thanks again to Andrew and the Best Lassonde team for putting this together and presenting it to us. This video will be available on demand on the Battlesnake official Twitch channel, and also the Stay Home and Code event page. So if you joined halfway through, or you want to review it again, or if you want to share it with a friend, we'll be posting that link live once we've got it all edited up and ready to go. So thanks again, Andrew. Really appreciate your time and joining us today. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.